Darkness hides many secrets, some whispered in hushed voices, others buried deep in the silence of the night. But every now and then, those secrets resurface, clawing their way back into the world, refusing to be forgotten. Tonight, we bring you 3 true stories, stories that will remind you that sometimes, reality is far more terrifying than any nightmare. So turn down the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's the truth. The first story comes from a woman named Sarah. She was a college student at the time, living alone in a small apartment just outside the city. It wasn't a fancy place, just a 1-bedroom with a tiny kitchen and an old, creaky floor that groaned under every step. But it was hers, and she loved the independence it gave her. One night, she was up late, studying for an important exam. The only sound in the apartment was the occasional rustling of papers and the quiet hum of her desk lamp. It was past midnight when she heard it, the distinct sound of a doorknob turning. She froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The apartment door was locked. She was sure of it. Slowly she stood up, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. The noise stopped. Holding her breath, she tiptoed towards the peephole, but the hallway was empty. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe it was just her mind playing tricks on her after hours of studying. She tried to shake it off and went back to her desk. Not even 10 minutes later, there it was again. The slow, deliberate sound of someone trying to turn the knob. But this time, it wasn't stopping. It was persistent. Her throat tightened as she reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed 911. Just as the operator picked up, a loud bang echoed through the apartment. Someone had thrown their full weight against the door. She let out a small gasp, backing away. "Someone is trying to break into my apartment," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. The operator told her to stay calm and that the police were on their way. But in that moment, staying calm was impossible. The door rattled again, harder this time. Sarah grabbed the heaviest thing she could find, a metal lamp from her bedside table, and stood near the door, her entire body shaking. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. No more turning of the knob, no more banging. Just silence. It felt even worse than the noise because now she had no idea if the person was still outside. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually, red and blue lights flashed through the window. The police arrived and searched the entire building, but they found no one. No footprints. No sign of forced entry. Nothing. It was as if whoever had been there had vanished into thin air. Sarah moved out a week later. To this day, she has no idea who was outside her apartment that night, or what would have happened if the door had given in. Our second story takes place in a quiet town where a man named Daniel worked the night shift at a gas station. It was a lonely job. Most of the time, the only people who stopped by were truck drivers or the occasional lost traveler. But on one particular night, Daniel experienced something he could never explain. It was around 2 a.m. when he first noticed the car. A black sedan, parked near the edge of the lot, just far enough away that he couldn't make out the driver's face. It had been sitting there for almost 20 minutes, engine running, but no one got out. Daniel tried to ignore it, but the unease in his gut wouldn't go away. Finally, he decided to step outside, pretending to take out the trash. As he walked past the car, he stole a quick glance inside. Empty. The driver's seat was completely vacant, but that didn't make sense. The headlights were on. The engine was running. Someone had to be inside. A shiver ran down his spine as he hurried back inside, locking the doors behind him. He watched from the counter, expecting someone to get out of the car any second, but no one did. The minutes stretched on, and the car didn't move. Finally, unable to take it anymore, he called the local sheriff's department. "There's a suspicious vehicle in the lot," he said. The dispatcher told him to stay put and that an officer would be there soon. But just as he hung up, the car's headlights flickered, and then it disappeared. Not drove away, not sped off. Just disappeared. 1 second it was there. The next, it was gone. The police arrived a few minutes later and found nothing. No tire marks. No sign that a car had ever been there. Daniel checked the security cameras the next day, desperate to prove that he hadn't imagined the whole thing. But the footage showed nothing. There was no car, no headlights, no trace of anything unusual. Daniel still works the night shift, but every so often he catches himself staring at that empty spot in the parking lot, wondering if he'll see those headlights again. Our final story is about a boy named Ryan who grew up in a small, rural town. As a child, he had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night and wandering around the house. His parents always found it odd, but kids do strange things, so they never thought much of it. One night when Ryan was about 10 years old, his mother woke up to the sound of footsteps. Thinking it was just Ryan again, she got up to guide him back to bed. But when she stepped into the hallway, she froze. Ryan was standing in the middle of the living room, staring out the window. His small body was rigid, his hands curled into fists. "Ryan," she called softly. He didn't respond. She walked up to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, as if just realizing she was there. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" Ryan finally turned to face her, his eyes wide and filled with something she couldn't quite place. "The man," he whispered. "He's in the yard." Her blood ran cold. She glanced out the window, expecting to see nothing but darkness. But there, standing just beyond the tree line, was a figure, tall, motionless, watching. Her breath caught in her throat. She reached for the light switch, but the moment the porch light flickered on, the man was gone. She locked every door and window that night. The next morning, Ryan had no memory of the man. No memory of waking up. No memory of standing at the window. But every night after that, his mother would wake up to the sound of footsteps. And every night, Ryan would be standing at the window, staring out into the dark, waiting. Sarah had always thought of herself as a rational person. She didn't believe in ghosts, and she certainly wasn't the type to get scared over nothing. But after that night, the night someone tried to break into her apartment, something inside her changed. At first, she tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just a random break-in attempt. Maybe it was just bad luck. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. Because ever since that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It started small. She would come home from class and find things slightly out of place. A book that she was sure had been on the shelf would be lying on the floor. The kitchen cabinets, which she always kept closed, would be slightly open. And then there were the noises, soft, almost imperceptible sounds in the middle of the night. A faint creaking of the floorboards, a distant rustling, like someone shifting their weight. She kept telling herself it was just her imagination, that she was still on edge after what happened. But then, she found the note. It was left on her kitchen counter, written in shaky, uneven handwriting. "Why didn't you open the door?" Sarah's stomach dropped. She hadn't told anyone about that night, not even her closest friends. The only people who knew were the police, and yet, somehow, someone knew. She called the police again, but like before, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. They told her it was probably a prank, someone trying to scare her, but Sarah knew better. That night, she barely slept. Every little sound sent her heart racing. Every shadow seemed to move just a little too much. And then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., her phone buzzed, a text message. "You should have opened the door." Sarah's hands shook as she stared at the screen. She didn't recognize the number. There was no name attached to it. And when she tried calling back, the line was dead. She packed her bags the next morning. She didn't care if it was paranoia or overreacting. She couldn't stay there anymore. She moved in with a friend across town, and for a while, things seemed to go back to normal. But the nightmares never stopped. And sometimes, when she was alone, she could still feel someone watching. Daniel had worked the night shift at the gas station for almost 5 years. He'd seen all kinds of strange things. Drunk customers, weirdos talking to themselves, even the occasional fight breaking out in the parking lot. But nothing had ever unnerved him like that car. The black sedan that had vanished. He tried to tell himself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the security cameras had glitched. Maybe his eyes had played tricks on him. But deep down, he knew what he saw, and he wasn't the only one. A few nights later, a truck driver came into the station looking pale. Daniel had seen him before, a regular who stopped by every few weeks during his late-night hauls. The man placed his coffee on the counter, his hands visibly shaking. "You see that car outside?" the trucker asked. Daniel frowned. "What car?" The trucker exhaled sharply and shook his head. "Never mind," but Daniel followed his gaze. And there it was, the black sedan, parked in the exact same spot as before. His stomach twisted into knots. He wanted to look inside again, but every part of him screamed not to. Instead, he grabbed his phone and snapped a picture from inside the station. When he looked at the screen, his breath caught in his throat. Parking lot was empty. He lifted his eyes back up. The car was still there. But in the picture, nothing. He put the phone down, his pulse pounding in his ears. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going. Out there, Ryan's mother never forgot the night she saw the man in the yard. After that, she started sleeping with a baseball bat beside her bed. She double-checked every lock, kept the curtains drawn, and made sure Ryan was never alone after dark. But no matter what she did, Ryan kept waking up. Every night, without fail, she would hear his small footsteps padding down the hallway. Every night, she would find him standing at the window, staring out into the darkness. And every night, he would say the same thing. "He's still there." She didn't know what to do. Doctors told her it was probably just a sleep disorder, that maybe he was dreaming and confusing it with reality. But she knew better. She had seen the man herself. One night, desperate for answers, she decided to stay awake. She sat on the couch, watching Ryan's bedroom door, waiting. Hours passed. The house was silent. And then, just past 3 a.m., the doorknob turned. Slowly, quietly. Ryan's bedroom door creaked open, and he stepped out. His eyes were half-lidded, his expression blank. He moved as if in a trance, walking straight toward the living room window. Her heart pounded as she followed. "Ryan," she whispered, "come back to bed." He didn't answer. He just pressed, his small hands against the glass, his breath fogging up the window. And then, for the first time, he turned to look at her. His voice was soft, distant. "He says he wants to come inside." Her blood turned to ice. She grabbed Ryan, pulling him away from the window, but before she could close the curtains, she saw him. The man, standing at the edge of the yard, except, this time, he wasn't alone. There were more of them. Shadowy figures, barely visible against the night, standing in a perfect line along the tree line. Watching. Waiting. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply locked the window, held Ryan close, and whispered a silent prayer. By morning, the figures were gone. But somehow, she knew, they would be back. The days that followed were eerily quiet. Ryan's mother kept the curtains drawn at all times, double-checked every lock in the house, and refused to let her son near the windows after dark. But no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching. Ryan, however, seemed different. He no longer woke up in the middle of the night. He didn't stand by the window anymore, and that terrified her even more. One evening, as she was tucking him into bed, she noticed something strange. His bedroom window, one she was sure had been locked, was slightly open. A chill crept up her spine as she rushed to close it. But, just as her fingers touched the glass, she heard it. A whisper. Soft, distant, barely audible. "He doesn't need to look anymore. We're already inside." Her heart stopped. She spun around, scanning the room, but nothing seemed out of place. Ryan was fast asleep, his breathing slow and steady. She told herself it was just her imagination, just exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. But deep down, she knew better. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in the living room, gripping the baseball bat tightly, her ears straining for any sound, any movement. The house was silent. Too silent, and then a creak from Ryan's room. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she rose to her feet, moving as quietly as she could. The hallway stretched before her, dark and endless, every step feeling heavier than the last. She reached Ryan's door and slowly pushed it open. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, as if no one had been sleeping there at all. The closet doors were slightly ajar. The window was open again, the curtains swaying gently in the breeze, and then she saw it. Small, muddy footprints leading from the bed to the window. Her breath caught in her throat. Ryan was gone. She ran outside, calling his name, her voice trembling. But the night swallowed her words, offering no response. The street was empty, the trees still. No sign of him. No sign of anything. But just as she was about to turn back, she saw something at the edge of the yard. A small figure, standing, motionless. Ryan! She sprinted toward him, relief flooding her chest, until she got closer. His face was blank, his eyes unfocused, staring into nothing. His tiny hands were covered in dirt, and when she reached out to touch him, he simply turned and walked past her, heading back toward the house. "Ryan?" she whispered, her voice barely holding steady. "What happened? Where did you go?" He didn't answer. He just climbed the porch steps, stepping inside without hesitation. She followed, her heart hammering. As soon as they crossed the threshold, she felt it. Something was wrong. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing down on her like a weight. The house, her house, felt unfamiliar. The walls seemed closer, the shadows seemed darker. And then Ryan finally spoke. "They're not outside anymore," he said softly. "They live here now." She froze. And then, from the corner of her eye, she saw it. Just a flicker of movement, a shadow shifting where there shouldn't have been one. She turned, but there was nothing there. Or at least, nothing she could see. That was the last night she spent in that house. By morning, she packed their things and left, never looking back. She didn't care where they went. Anywhere was better than staying there. But no matter where they moved, no matter how far they ran, the feeling never truly went away. The feeling that they were never really alone.